I woke up to the sound of plastic crunching and a low grunt outside my bedroom window. It was just after 2 in the morning, and I hadn't been asleep long. I peeked through the blinds, expecting maybe a raccoon or some drunk teen messing around. But no. It was Priscilla Zorn, 50-something, bleach blonde bob, HOA vice president and full-time neighborhood menace. She was standing in my driveway, windbreaker flapping in the breeze, slamming both of my garbage bins into the pavement like she was auditioning for a wrestling match. "Are you serious right now?" I whispered to myself, grabbing my phone. I'd moved into the neighborhood a year ago. My name's Jonah Grant, electrician by trade and not someone who usually gets into it with anybody, but Priscilla. She had a way of finding problems where there weren't any. The HOA had rules, sure, but she made up her own versions and barked them like law. The violation this time, leaving my bins out 10 minutes past pickup, and I mean 10. I'd come home from a 12-hour shift, ate dinner, and forgot. That was enough for her to lose it and go full demolition mode on my property. I hit record on my phone and caught the whole thing, her dragging my garbage bins into the street, stomping on the lids and muttering something about setting an example. The next morning, I walked out to survey the damage. Both bins were cracked, one had a wheel completely snapped off. Trash scattered across the driveway like confetti. My neighbor, old Mr. Hargrove, shook his head from across the street. "She's off her rocker, Jonah," he said. "You should call someone." "Oh, I plan to." I spent the next hour collecting the footage from my doorbell cam and the video I shot from the window. I even found a piece of her broken sandal next to the bin. I'm guessing she didn't notice or maybe didn't care. I filed a report with the police that afternoon. The officer looked at the footage, whistled low, and said, "Yeah, that's criminal mischief, and maybe trespassing too." By the time they left, I had a case number and a printed copy of the complaint, and I made sure to CC the HOA's email on it just for fun. That night, the HOA sent out one of their usual passive-aggressive newsletters. Right at the bottom in bold was the note: "All residents are reminded to follow trash collection policies. Non-compliance may result in disciplinary action." No mention of the incident at all. Classic cover-up. But I wasn't going to let it slide. Priscilla Zorn had messed with the wrong guy. The following morning, I parked my truck in the driveway earlier than usual. Not because I had a job my next client rescheduled, but because I needed time to prepare. I wasn't going to let this disappear into the HOA's paper shredder like all the other complaints they buried. I had something better: evidence, a badge number, and a plan. Around 8, I walked to the mailbox and crossed paths with Brenda Mayers, who lived 2 doors down. She cradled her Yorkshire Terrier like it was made of porcelain and wore the expression of someone who'd just bitten into a lemon. "You know, Jonah," she said, "maybe if people followed the rules, we wouldn't have these situations." "You mean like trespassing and property damage?" I said, tilting my head. "Yeah, I agree. People should be held accountable." Brenda didn't respond. She adjusted her sunglasses and turned away, muttering something about neighborhood standards. I watched her walk off, the dog's rhinestone collar glittering in the sun. By mid-morning, I was seated in a small conference room at City Code Enforcement. The officer I'd spoken to had passed the complaint up the chain, and now a county investigator named Wallace Binks was reviewing the footage again, this time with a supervisor. "Been smashing is one thing," Wallace said, pausing the video right as Priscilla kicked the lid off, "but dragging them into the street, that's obstruction. And she's doing this at night, uninvited, on private property." The supervisor leaned forward, tapping on a printed still of her face mid-stomp. "You said she holds a position on the HOA board. Is she acting under any authority?" "No," I said. "She never issued a notice, no warning, no discussion. Just decided my bins offended her soul and turned into a one-woman demolition crew." Wallace nodded. "All right. We're forwarding this to the city attorney. There's a municipal code about targeted harassment by association officers. If she did this more than once, it could be a pattern." That last part stuck with me. When I got home, I started knocking on doors. Not everyone answered, and some pretended not to hear me at all. But a few did, and what I learned made my skin crawl. 2 houses over, the Tran family had been fined 3 times in 1 month for gravel spreading onto HOA grass. Their sprinkler system had flooded right before that, loosening the edge of their landscaping. The HOA threatened to revoke their landscaping approval, whatever that meant, and tacked on another $200 in aesthetic violation fees. Behind me, the Sanduvals had their backyard deck stained the wrong shade of brown, according to Priscilla. She took photos while they were at work and called a private hearing without them. They only found out when the lien notice arrived. But the worst was Marlene, a retired nurse with arthritis so bad she walked with 2 canes. She showed me a photo of her porch, a small ceramic gnome garden, a few succulents, and a wind chime. She said it looked cluttered, Marlene said, her voice trembling. They fined me $75 every week. I had to take it all down. Did you appeal it? I tried, she said, but the hearing was scheduled during my physical therapy. I asked to reschedule and they said I forfeited by not attending. I took notes, careful and detailed. I asked for permission to record each story on my phone. I wasn't just building a defense, I was building a case. That night, I uploaded everything to a private folder and sent it to Wallace. Within an hour, he responded, "This is bigger than we thought." Next morning, I received a formal letter from the HOA, certified, thick envelope. Inside was a notice of non-compliance, accusing me of obstructing HOA operations, spreading defamatory content, and failing to maintain visual harmony. At the bottom was a fine, $150. I laughed out loud. Bold move, considering they knew full well I had the police report, video evidence, and now a growing list of victim statements. They weren't trying to win, they were trying to intimidate, but I wasn't backing down. I walked into the HOA's monthly open meeting 3 days later. I wasn't alone. Marlene was there, both canes clicking against the tile. Mr. Tran held a folder so thick it had rubber bands around it. The Sanduvals stood tall behind me, arms crossed. Priscilla sat at the front table, flanked by the president and treasurer. She looked up from her notes and froze. "Mr. Grant," she said, voice sugary, "we weren't aware you intended to speak this evening." "I brought my neighbors," I said, setting my bag down. "I figured you'd want a full house." The president, a balding man named Craig, cleared his throat. "This isn't the time for—" "Oh, I think it is," I said, pulling out a stack of printed photos. "These are stills from my security footage. Date stamped. Your vice president trespassed on my property, vandalized my bins, and dragged them into the street. That's already been reported to the police." Priscilla's face turned the color of spoiled milk. Craig opened his mouth, but I held up a copy of the police report. And here's the report. Filed, confirmed, and under active investigation, but it doesn't stop there. Because I've spoken to at least 6 neighbors who have experienced similar harassment, selective enforcement, and fabricated fines. I set down the binder. That's all in here. Testimonies, photos. Documentation of fines that don't correspond to the bylaws you've published. The room had gone dead silent. "I've given copies of everything to the city attorney's office," I continued, "and I've spoken to 2 local reporters. Turns out they've been waiting for someone to speak up." "Guess who just became the face of your problem?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Craig tried to speak again, but Wallace walked through the door at that moment, followed by a uniformed officer. The back row gasped. "We're serving a citation and beginning official inquiry," Wallace said, handing Priscilla a white envelope. "You are not to perform any further HOA enforcement activity until this is resolved." The officer handed Craig a second envelope. "Your organization is under review for non-compliance with municipal code regarding fair governance. You'll be contacted by the city clerk's office." No one moved. Brenda was in the corner, clutching her dog like it might shield her from liability. I turned to the rest of the room. "If anything like this has happened to you, come talk to me afterward. We're collecting statements and forming a petition. This HOA doesn't belong to 3 people behind a table. It belongs to all of us." Applause started slow, then picked up. Even Mr. Hargrove stood and gave a respectful nod. Priscilla didn't say a word. She just stared at the envelope in her hands like it had personally betrayed her. As I walked out, Marlene caught up to me. "You really did it," she said. "You made them listen." "No," I said, holding the door open for her. "We did. And we're just getting started." 2 mornings after the meeting, I opened my front door and found a manila envelope on my welcome mat. No postage, just a single word handwritten in black marker across the front. "Enough." I didn't touch it right away. Instead, I took a photo, then used a pen to lift the flap. Inside was a torn HOA newsletter, a snapshot of my truck parked next to my house, and a printout of my property tax record with my name circled in red ink. No note. No sender. I brought it inside, laid everything out on the kitchen table, and took more pictures. Someone was trying to send a message, probably hoping I'd back off. It had the opposite effect. I drove straight to the precinct and slid the envelope across the desk to Officer Tillman, the same officer who'd handled my original report. He examined the contents slowly, then looked up at me. "You think this is from someone on the HOA board?" he asked. "Who else would have access to my property records, my truck photo, and the nerve to leave it without a return address?" He nodded. "All right. This qualifies as intimidation. I'll add it to the case file and escalate to the detective unit. We'll keep you posted." By the time I got home, I had 6 new voicemails. 3 were from neighbors I didn't even know. Word had spread. People weren't just upset, they were furious. Priscilla's outburst had cracked the dam, and now years of buried frustration were pouring out. That night, 23 residents gathered in my backyard. Some brought folding chairs. Others stood along the fence. Someone even brought lemonade. It felt more like a town hall than a neighborly get-together. "I've lived here since 1994, said a man named Cyrus, a retired firefighter. "We used to vote on things. Now we're just told what to do, and half the time it's not even in writing. They fine me for painting my shutters non-compliant blue," said a woman named Dana. When I asked what the compliant color was, they told me it was subject to seasonal interpretation. "What does that even mean?" "They entered my backyard while I was at work," added a young woman named Leela. "Didn't leave a notice. Just took photos and emailed me a warning about pest-attracting habitat. I have bird feeders." That's it. Each story added weight. I took notes and recorded with a lapel mic clipped to my flannel pocket. By the end of the night, we had enough for a full legal review. The next morning, I made an appointment with a local real estate attorney named Malik Rowan. He had experience with HOA abuse cases and wasted no time digging in. "You've got 2 layers here," Malik said, flipping through the binder. Criminal intimidation, which the police are already handling, and civil overreach, abuse of power, selective enforcement, and likely financial misappropriation. He pointed to a spreadsheet one of the neighbors had compiled, showing fines collected over the past 5 years, and how little of that money had been accounted for in the HOA's public financial summaries. "Where's the rest?" I asked. "Best case, it's sitting in an unreported slush fund. Worst case," he looked up. "It's gone." That afternoon, Malik filed a civil petition on behalf of 22 homeowners, requesting a forensic audit of the HOA's finances, formal suspension of board authority, and a court-appointed trustee to oversee operations until a fair election could be held. 3 days later, a county judge signed the order. The news hit the neighborhood like a thunderclap. Priscilla didn't show her face for 2 straight days. Then, on the 3rd, she tried to host a community tidiness walkabout, which mostly involved her strutting down the sidewalk with a clipboard and no one following. I watched from my porch. She made it halfway down the block before someone from the auditing firm arrived at her door and handed her a subpoena. She didn't even pretend to smile, just snatched it from his hand and slammed the door behind her. That same afternoon, Detective Ruiz from the precinct called me back. "We ran a forensic trace on that envelope you brought in," he said. "There were 3 partial prints and a fiber match to an interior car matte make and model narrowed down to a late model Lexus. We cross-referenced registration records. And Priscilla Zorn owns a 2019 Lexus RX with matching interior. We're bringing her in for questioning tomorrow." The next day, I received a text from Malik telling me to meet him at the courthouse. When I arrived, he handed me a copy of the judge's interim ruling. It was everything we'd hoped for. The court had officially frozen the HOA's discretionary powers. All fines, liens, and enforcement actions were suspended pending the outcome of the audit. A temporary administrator, an accountant named Sharon Lynn, was appointed to oversee operations. And most importantly, a public hearing would be held in 30 days to determine whether the existing board would be permanently dissolved. I barely had time to process it before my phone buzzed again. "Ruiz," she confessed, he said. "Said she left the envelope as a warning, claimed it was personal, not HOA related, but that won't hold up. We're filing misdemeanor harassment and unlawful access charges." "What about the HOA itself?" I asked. "Exactly why I'm calling." During questioning, she let something slip. Apparently, she and the treasurer have been authorizing payments for consulting services to a company registered under the treasurer's cousin's name. No services were ever rendered. So they were laundering, looks like it. "We've opened a joint investigation with the county's Financial Crimes Division." I hung up and stared at the phone for a long moment. For the first time since this whole thing started, it felt like the tide wasn't just turning, it had crashed down on them. Later that evening, Sharon Lynn held a public meeting in the community center. It was the first time in over a year that an HOA meeting wasn't led by Priscilla or her cronies. No one interrupted. No one brushed off questions. Sharon brought receipts literally. She displayed a breakdown of HOA spending over the past 2 years. Over $30,000 was marked as miscellaneous consulting. No records of services, no invoices, no approvals from the community. Gasps echoed through the room. "Moving forward," Sharon said, "we'll be publishing all financial decisions monthly. Any expenditures over $500 will require community vote. And as for elections, nominations open tonight." A hand shot up in the back. "What about the current board?" Sharon didn't flinch. "Suspended, pending civil proceedings. If they're found liable for misconduct, they will be permanently barred from holding office." As the meeting wrapped, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Mr. Tran. "I nominated you," he said. "For what, board president?" I raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that? You're the reason we're standing here tonight. You didn't flinch when they tried to scare you. We need someone who doesn't work in shadows." I didn't answer right away. But as I looked around the room, neighbors talking freely, no tension, no fear, I realized something. This neighborhood didn't need another tyrant with a clipboard. It needed a watchtower and a floodlight. "All right," I said. "Let's clean this place up for real." 3 weeks after the court hearing, the neighborhood looked different. Not physically, most of the houses still had the same manicured hedges and solar lights along the walkways, but there was a quiet shift in the air. People lingered at mailboxes now. Conversations happened out in the open. The fear that used to hang over every dry lawn and mismatched shutter had lifted. Still, there was one piece left to fall into place. The forensic audit was complete. I got the call from Sharon Lynn on a Monday morning. She just finished reviewing the final report with the city-appointed legal counsel. Her voice was calm, measured, but there was a tightness beneath it. "Jonah, we need to meet," she said. "Today." We sat down in the community center conference room. Sharon laid out the audit summary with 2 fingers, her other hand resting on a legal pad filled with names and numbers. Between January of last year and April of this year, the previous board authorized 74 separate payments labeled as consulting, landscape evaluations, or compliance support, totaling over $41,000. I leaned in. "And none of those were real vendors," she shook her head. The audit traced the payments to 2 shell accounts, One registered under a company called Eastward Residential Services, the other under Clearmark Solutions. Both were created within a month of each other. Both list the same mailing address the treasurer's cousin, just like the detective suspected. Any idea what they were doing with the money? Wire transfers to personal accounts, travel expenses. There's even a charge for a luxury car lease buried under transportation logistics. I blinked. You're telling me Priscilla and the treasurer were driving around in a BMW paid for by neighborhood fines and HOA dues, she said. They reallocated reserve funds without approval. That's where it gets criminal. The city attorney had already forwarded the findings to the district attorney's office. A grand jury was reviewing the case for formal indictment. Sharon handed me a sealed envelope with my name on it. You're being called as a witness, she said. So are 6 other residents. That afternoon, subpoenas were issued. The treasurer was picked up first detained outside a golf course in a white polo and khakis, looking like he'd wandered out of a country club catalog shoot. Priscilla was arrested the next morning at her sister's house 2 towns over. She tried to claim she was staying with family for health reasons, but the officer had the warrant in hand before she could finish her sentence. The news made the local paper. HOA officials indicted for embezzlement, fraud, and harassment. A photo accompanied the article, Priscilla looking away from the camera, jaw tight, surrounded by reporters. The arraignment was scheduled for the following week. I sat in the second row of the courtroom beside Mr. Tran and Dana. The prosecutor laid it out plainly. Wire fraud, misappropriation of funds, and conspiracy to intimidate residents into silence. The charges were stacked so high, even the defense attorney avoided eye contact with the gallery. When the judge denied Priscilla bail pending trial, a few people in the courtroom audibly exhaled. She'd spent years making everyone else feel small. Now she was the one being escorted out in cuffs, her shoes squeaking against the polished tiles. But it wasn't the end. A month later, the neighborhood held its first uncontested election in 5 years. I didn't campaign. I didn't make flyers or knock on doors, but when the votes were counted, I'd been elected president by a clear majority. Not because people thought I wanted the job, but because they trusted I wouldn't use it to control them. Our first meeting under the new board was held on a cool Saturday morning. No dress code, no power trips, just folding chairs on the greenbelt and a whiteboard with bullet points. We passed a motion to implement transparent budgeting, created a rotating volunteer committee to review rule changes, and most importantly voted to repeal over a dozen outdated or selectively enforced policies. Marlene stood up during open discussion and asked if the gnome garden rule could be removed. Everyone laughed. We crossed it off, effective immediately. 1 week later, I received a letter from the district attorney's office. Priscilla had accepted a plea deal. She would serve 18 months in county jail, pay restitution, and be permanently barred from holding any administrative role in any civil association in the state. The treasurer got 9 months and a financial penalty. It wasn't just justice, it was closure. The broken bins were long gone, replaced by new ones the city delivered after I submitted a claim. But I kept the cracked lid and the melted wheel in my garage, not out of bitterness but as a reminder. That one small act of aggression had been the thread that unraveled an entire web of corruption. A few days later, I was out front rewiring a porch light when a car pulled up. A young couple stepped out, looking at the house across the street with a brochure in hand. They saw me and waved. "Hey, we're thinking of moving in," the woman said. "Is the HOA here as bad as the reviews say?" I wiped sweat from my brow and walked over. "Used to be," I said. "But things changed. We cleaned house." They looked at one another, surprised. "No fines for picking the wrong flower pots?" the guy asked. "Not unless your flower pots are full of fireworks," I said. They laughed. "Welcome to the neighborhood," I added. "We do things a little differently now." And we did. Because once people realized the rules weren't sacred and that the people enforcing them weren't above accountability, It stopped being about fear and started being about fairness. It wasn't perfect. Some meetings still got heated. Some lawns still went a little wild, but it was ours now. And no one, not even a clipboard queen with a Lexus, and an attitude, was going to take that away again.